She never thought twice about being in his presence, whether it was in his home, at family events, or passing by his office after school. But now, Taylor was 16. No longer the little girl fit. In every town, there's always someone you trust without question, a figure of authority, a man in uniform, someone you believe will always do what's right. But what happens when that trust is misplaced? What happens when the line between protector and predator is crossed? Welcome to Unseen Crime Stories, where we uncover the truths hidden behind closed doors and give voice to the silenced. If you believe in justice, in accountability, in hearing the full story, please subscribe and hit the bell. Because what you're about to hear, this betrayal, this murder, this cover-up, it didn't happen in some distant city. It happened in a quiet town, a place just like yours. In this quiet, familiar community, children played in the streets, neighbors exchanged friendly waves, and life moved at its usual pace. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But beneath the surface of routine life, something was unfolding, something that would leave the town reeling. What do you do when the person everyone looks up to, the one sworn to serve and protect, has something to hide? At first, nothing seemed out of place. He was a sheriff, a father, a husband. She was a bright young girl, just 16, with her whole life ahead of her. Their paths crossed like so many others in this small town, but somewhere along the way, something changed. Conversations that started casually became longer. Private moments, once innocent, turned into something much more complicated. And before anyone knew it, the line had been crossed, a line that could never be uncrossed. How does a community come to terms with the realization that the person they trusted the most is capable of the unimaginable? Some say every crime leaves a trail, no matter how carefully it's covered. But what happens when the one leading the search is the very person who knows exactly where that trail ends? Sheriff Thomas Brennan was more than just a man in uniform. He was the foundation of this town, trusted by neighbors, respected by colleagues, admired by his family. To most, Thomas was a man who balanced the pressures of law enforcement with the responsibilities of being a husband and father. Married to Rebecca, with 2 daughters, he lived the life others aspired to, seamlessly juggling work and family. His younger daughter, Sophie, adored him. To Sophie, her father wasn't just the sheriff, he was her hero, the rock of their family. Thomas's second daughter had a best friend, Taylor Mitchell. Taylor had spent much of her childhood in the Brennan household. She and Sophie were inseparable, the kind of friends who didn't knock before entering each other's homes. Their friendship stretched back as far as anyone could remember. From building sandcastles in the backyard as toddlers to late-night study sessions in high school. Wherever Sophie was, Taylor wasn't far behind. But Taylor wasn't just Sophie's best friend. She was the daughter of Deputy Marcus Mitchell, a man who had served under Thomas for nearly a decade. Marcus and Thomas shared more than a professional relationship. They were close friends. They had celebrated holidays together, attended family gatherings, stood by each other through life's ups and downs. Taylor's presence in Thomas's life was as constant as the ticking of a clock, something that never required a second thought. She was just always there. The bond between these families was built over years, strengthened by trust and shared memories. Thomas remembered the day Taylor was born as if it were yesterday. He had been at the hospital, holding her tiny body in his arms, promising Marcus that he would always be there for her. Over the years, their lives intertwined naturally. Neighborhood barbecues where Taylor sat on Thomas's shoulders. Summer vacations where the Mitchells and Brennans laughed together. Christmas mornings spent exchanging gifts. Taylor was there for everything. Birthdays, recitals, lazy Sunday afternoons in the Brennan living room. Her connection to Thomas was deep and unquestioned. To Taylor, Thomas was Sophie's father, a second father figure in her life, someone she could trust completely. But now Taylor was 16, no longer the little girl she was stepping into adulthood with dreams of becoming someone important, someone who would one day wear a badge of her own. Taylor had ambition, the kind that could fill a room with energy. She wanted to join one of the top federal agencies in the country, maybe the FBI, maybe the Secret Service. She had goals, and she knew what she wanted. Their lives, once connected through friendship and family, now stood on the edge of a shift neither of them could see coming. Thomas saw her more frequently now, not just as Sophie's best friend, but as someone with whom he crossed paths regularly. She was in his house almost every weekend. They saw each other at family parties, school events, and occasionally Taylor stopped by the sheriff's office to meet her father, waiting in the lobby or wandering the halls. She was always around, always present, and with each passing day, their paths became just a little more entangled. It started like any other day, one that should have slipped into the routine of life, but some moments have a way of shifting everything, and this one would be no different. Taylor hadn't planned on staying long at the sheriff's station. She had only stopped to meet her father, Deputy Marcus Mitchell, hoping for a quick hello and a ride home. It was something she had done countless times before, waiting in the familiar halls, surrounded by the hum of conversations and the occasional ring of phones. It was ordinary, uneventful. But on this particular afternoon, the air felt different. Sheriff Thomas Brennan spotted her from his office window as she entered the station. Her presence caught his eye in a way it never had before. She wasn't the same girl he remembered. A shadow of adolescence had given way to the undeniable form of a young woman.
There was a grace in the way she moved now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Thomas told himself it was nothing, just an observation, but the thought lingered longer than it should have. He knew Taylor well, too well, in fact. He had watched her grow up, laughed at her childhood antics, celebrated her achievements alongside his daughter Sophie. But today, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, something stirred inside him, a shift he didn't want to acknowledge. He tried to shake it off, tried to remind himself of who she was, who he was. But the more he watched her, the more difficult it became to look away. She wasn't just Taylor, the little girl from the backyard birthday parties. She was someone else now. Someone he found himself noticing in ways he shouldn't. The moment of recognition unsettled him like a sudden misstep on familiar ground. Guilt gnawed at the edges of his thoughts, whispering that this was wrong, that he needed to stop. But temptation has a way of creeping in, winding its way through cracks in even the most disciplined mind. And as much as he fought to push it away, it clung to him, persistent and unwelcome. When Taylor made her way down the hall toward her father's desk, Thomas stepped out of his office, almost instinctively. He knew Marcus was out on assignment. He had sent him out earlier himself. There was no one else for Taylor to meet, no one else for her to sit with. And in that moment, Thomas saw an opportunity, a way to prolong this encounter, to explore a curiosity he didn't want to admit he felt. "Taylor," he called out, his voice casual, almost fatherly. "Your dad's not back yet. Why don't you come wait in my office?" There was nothing in his tone to suggest anything unusual, no reason for Taylor to feel uneasy. She smiled easily, trusting him completely. He was, after all, her father's closest friend, someone she had known her entire life. She followed him without hesitation, walking into the office she had seen so many times before. Thomas offered her a seat by the window, watching as she settled in. She glanced around the room, her eyes catching on the artifacts and photographs scattered across the shelves. Mementos from years in law enforcement, framed commendations, keepsakes from old cases. The room, much like the man himself, seemed steeped in experience and authority. Taylor admired it all with a kind of wonder, unaware of the thoughts unraveling in Thomas's mind. He tried to act normal, tried to remind himself that this was just another conversation, just another day. But as he sat across from her, something inside him refused to quiet down. She wasn't just Taylor, a visitor in his office. She was a young woman, 16, sitting within arm's reach. Someone who, for the first time in years, made him feel something unexpected. He asked her about school, an easy topic, familiar territory. And Taylor, comfortable in his presence, responded eagerly. She spoke about her classes, her friends, and the future she envisioned for herself. "I've been thinking about going into law enforcement," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "Maybe the FBI, maybe the Secret Service, something that matters." Thomas listened, his attention fully on her now. There was an earnestness in her words, a spark of ambition that reminded him of his own younger days. And in that moment, he saw an opportunity, a chance to offer guidance, to position himself as someone who could shape her future. The idea came to him unbidden, a way to extend their conversations beyond this office, to make sure these moments between them didn't end here. "You know," Thomas said slowly, "I have some friends in those agencies. I could put in a good word for you, maybe even help you get some hands-on experience." Taylor's face lit up at the offer. "Really? You'd do that for me?" He smiled, playing the part of the mentor she believed him to be. "Of course, but there's a lot to learn before you get there. It's not an easy path, and you'll need to work hard if you want. I could help you prepare." There was nothing in his voice that suggested anything other than genuine kindness, and Taylor, eager to succeed, accepted the offer without hesitation. She didn't question his motives. Why would she? To her, this was just an older, experienced man offering her guidance, someone she trusted implicitly. Thomas leaned back in his chair, satisfied with how easily the conversation had flowed, how naturally he had planted the seeds for future encounters. He told himself this was harmless, that he was only helping a young woman reach her goals. But deep down, he knew better. He knew that every word he had spoken, every promise he had made, was part of something much more complicated. As Taylor sat across from him, excited about the opportunities ahead, Thomas allowed himself a moment to revel in the power he held. The power to shape her dreams, to guide her path, and, if he chose, to take these meetings further than she could ever imagine. And in that moment, a road of no return had been crossed, one that could never be undone. But Thomas was careful, too careful. With every word, every suggestion, he planted little doubts in Taylor's mind. He warned her not to tell too many people about their sessions, claiming they wouldn't understand her ambition. "People might try to hold you back," he said. "They might tell you it's impossible, that you're aiming too high. The fewer people know, the better. It's safer that way." At first, it made sense to Taylor. She'd heard the doubts from others before, how young women, especially women like her, shouldn't aim too high. Thomas's warning felt protective, even wise. She didn't question it. Why would she? He was only looking out for her, or so she thought. The sessions began innocently enough, conversations about the challenges of law enforcement, the importance of resilience, the skills she'd need to thrive in high-pressure situations. They met after school hours, at first in Thomas's office, then later at more private locations, under the pretense of focused training. He always made her feel special, like she was receiving something no one else could offer her. And Taylor, eager to impress, gave the sessions her all, believing they were shaping her future. But slowly the nature of these meetings began to change. What started as professional guidance became something more personal, more intimate. Thomas started asking her about her life outside of school, her fears, her hopes, her relationships. He blurred the line between mentor and confidant, weaving himself deeper into her life without her realizing it. He was patient, calculating. He didn't rush things. He let Taylor come to him, allowed her to trust him completely. Every time she opened up, every time she leaned on him for advice, the grip he had on her life tightened. And Taylor, caught in the glow of his attention, never saw it for what it was. She believed she was being guided, not manipulated. She believed Thomas was helping her, not grooming her. The sessions began to stretch longer into the evenings. Thomas always had a reason to extend them, an important topic they hadn't covered yet, a critical piece of advice that couldn't wait. Soon they were meeting late into the night, the meetings framed as necessary, essential steps on her journey toward success. If you want to make it, he told her, you have to be willing to put in the extra effort. And Taylor, driven by ambition and the desire to please him, agreed without hesitation. She told herself these meetings were part of her growth, that the late hours were a small price to pay for everything Thomas was offering her. But with each session, she found herself more attached to him, not just as a mentor, but as someone she trusted deeply, someone she depended on in ways she couldn't explain. Thomas knew exactly what he was doing. He crafted his words carefully, making her believe that their time together was both a privilege and a secret, something they had to protect from those who might misunderstand. Some people won't see this for what it really is, he told her. They'll think it's inappropriate. They'll try to come between us, tell you to quit, make you give up on your dream. But I know how far you can go, Taylor. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Taylor believed him. Why wouldn't she? He was the sheriff, her father's trusted friend, the man who had known her all her life. If he said their meetings were necessary, they were. If he said the secrecy was for her benefit, she trusted him. And so she kept quiet, telling no one, not her father, not Sophie, not her closest friends, about the time she spent with Thomas. The late-night sessions soon became their own little world, a place where Taylor felt both vulnerable and powerful. Thomas made her feel like she was becoming someone important, someone capable of great things. And the more time they spent together, the more she relied on him, not just for guidance, but for emotional support. She saw him as a protector, someone who understood her in ways no one else did. But Thomas's mentorship wasn't just about her future. It was about something selfish. He made sure she needed him, not just for her career, but for her sense of worth. With each passing week, Taylor found herself more drawn to him, more dependent on his approval. She wasn't just learning from him, she was falling under his spell. Then one evening, the dynamic shifted completely. They were reviewing case files, discussing real-world examples of high-pressure decision-making, when Thomas's hand lingered just a moment too long on her shoulder. Taylor didn't pull away. She didn't know she should. It felt like part of the closeness they had built, a natural extension of the bond they shared. And Thomas, sensing her acceptance, took it as permission to go further. The first kiss came without warning, but it didn't feel forced. It felt inevitable, like a step they had been moving toward all along. Taylor, caught in the moment, didn't question it. She had grown used to following Thomas's lead, trusting his guidance. If this was part of their connection, then she welcomed it. That night, the bridge between mentor and lover disappeared entirely. What followed was no longer just mentorship, it was a full-fledged affair, hidden behind the same veil of secrecy Thomas had so carefully crafted. Their meetings continued, now infused with a new intensity, a combination of passion and control that left Taylor feeling both exhilarated and vulnerable. She was falling deeper, believing that what they shared was real. To Taylor, Thomas wasn't just a mentor anymore. He was her guide, her protector, her everything. But Thomas's control over Taylor wasn't just emotional, it was absolute.
He had woven himself into every aspect of her life, and with each passing day, Taylor depended more on him, trusted him more, and believed that what they had was something worth protecting. As their affair deepened, the walls around them closed tighter, locking Taylor into a world she didn't realize was built on manipulation and deceit. There was no turning back now. Thomas had her exactly where he wanted, completely under his control, and hopelessly in love.
Secrets have a way of changing people, of creeping into the small spaces of life and shifting everything just slightly out of place. At first, the changes are subtle, hardly noticeable, but as time goes on, the weight of those hidden truths begins to show. For Taylor, the affair with Thomas had become the center of her world. Where once she had been open, bubbly, and connected to those closest to her, she now began to pull away, slowly but surely. The Taylor everyone knew was slipping into the shadows. Calls from friends went unanswered. Hangouts with Sophie became fewer and further between. Conversations with her father, Marcus, grew shorter by the day. Where once she had shared everything with him, the small victories, the daily frustrations, now she gave him little more than one-word answers and excuses. Marcus could feel the distance growing, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly why. He had always been close to Taylor. They had shared a bond that most fathers would envy. But now, every attempt to connect seemed to be met with a wall. She was always busy, always tired, always distracted. He tried to brush it off at first. Teenagers go through phases, he told himself. Maybe it's the stress of school, the pressure of thinking about her future. But the longer it went on, the harder it became to ignore. There was a shift in her demeanor, something that felt out of character. The Taylor he knew didn't keep secrets from him, but now it felt as if she were carrying something heavy, something she wasn't willing to share. Marcus wasn't the type to let things slide for long. One evening he found his chance to confront her. She had come home late, her expression distant, as if her mind were somewhere else entirely. He waited until she was in the kitchen, putting her things down, before stepping in. "Taylor," he said, keeping his tone steady, "we need to talk." Taylor looked up, a flicker of guilt crossing her face before she masked it with a smile. "What's up, Dad?" she asked, her voice casual, but Marcus could hear the tension beneath it. "I've noticed you've been distant lately," he said carefully. "You're not around as much. You're not talking to me like you used to. What's going on?" For a moment, Taylor seemed caught off guard, as if she hadn't expected him to notice. But then she smiled again, this time more forced. "It's nothing, Dad. Just school, lot on my plate." Marcus wasn't convinced. Something was off, and no matter how hard she tried to act normal, he could feel the distance between them growing. He pressed her gently, asking if there was anything she needed to talk about, anything that might be bothering her. But Taylor was ready for the questions. She had learned from Thomas how to dodge, how to deflect, how to steer conversations away from dangerous territory without raising too much suspicion. "I'm fine, Dad," she insisted, her voice just a little too cheerful. "Really, Dad, you don't have to worry about me." Marcus wanted to believe her, wanted to take her words at face value, but a knot of unease settled in his gut, one that he couldn't quite shake. Meanwhile, Thomas was carefully managing the changes in his own life. Rebecca, his wife, had begun to sense that something was different. After years of marriage, she knew Thomas better than anyone, and lately there were small things that didn't add up. He had always been a man of routine, steady, predictable, reliable. But now there were moments when he seemed distant, distracted, as if his mind were somewhere else entirely. He came home later than usual, offering vague explanations about long shifts or unexpected meetings. And when he was home, there was a restlessness about him, an unease that Rebecca hadn't seen before.
She asked him about it, of course, small, subtle questions, not wanting to seem accusatory. "Everything okay at work?" she would ask as they sat down for dinner. Or, "You seem a little off lately. Is something bothering you?" Thomas was ready for the questions. He knew how to lie without making it obvious, how to offer just enough truth to satisfy her without giving anything away. "It's just work," he would say, his tone light, but not too light. "You know how things get this time of year." And Rebecca, though still unsettled, would let it go, for a while at least. But the nagging feeling didn't go away. She noticed the small things, how he checked his phone more often, how he seemed unusually guarded about where he was going or what he was doing. There were nights when he came to bed long after she had fallen asleep, and mornings when he left the house earlier than usual, always with an excuse at the ready. Rebecca told herself she was probably overthinking things. Thomas was the sheriff, after all. His job came with its share of stress and responsibility. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about work. Something had changed. She just couldn't figure out what. The tension in the Brennan household was slight at first, barely noticeable, but it grew with each passing day, like a splinter buried beneath the skin, small enough to ignore, but impossible to forget. Thomas was careful, though, careful to never let the cracks show too much, careful to keep the walls of his double life intact. He knew how to say the right things, how to offer just enough affection to keep suspicion at bay. To Rebecca, he was still the man she had married, just a little tired, a little more preoccupied. To his daughters, he was still their father, just a bit more distant than usual.
But the nagging feeling didn't go away. She noticed the small things, how he checked his phone more often, how he seemed unusually guarded about where he was going or what he was doing. There were nights when he came to bed long after she had fallen asleep, and mornings when he left the house earlier than usual, always with an excuse at the ready. Rebecca told herself she was probably overthinking things. Thomas was the sheriff, after all. His job came with its fair share of stress and responsibility. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about work. Something had changed. She just couldn't figure out what. The tension in the Brennan household was slight at first, barely noticeable, but it grew with each passing day, like a splinter buried beneath the skin, small enough to ignore, but impossible to forget. Thomas was careful, though, careful to never let the cracks show too much, careful to keep the walls of his double life intact. He knew how to say the right things, how to offer just enough affection to keep suspicion at bay. To Rebecca, he was still the man she had married, just a little more tired, a little more preoccupied. To his daughters, he was still their father, just a bit more distant than usual. But Thomas knew the truth. He knew that the walls were closing in, slowly but surely. And no matter how carefully he managed things, the weight of his secret was beginning to take its toll. Taylor, too, was feeling the strain. She missed the simplicity of her old life, missed the ease with which she could talk to her father, missed the carefree laughter she used to share with Sophie. But every time she thought about stepping back, about pulling away from Thomas, she felt the invisible chains tighten around her. He had become more than just a mentor, more than just a lover. He had become the center of her world. And even as she felt the distance growing between herself and the people she loved, she told herself it was worth it. Thomas had promised her a future, had made her believe that what they shared was special. She couldn't walk away now, not when she had already come so far. And so the distance grew, between Taylor and her father, between Thomas and his wife, between who they were and who they had become. The cracks were small, but they were there, waiting, widening, threatening to shatter everything the moment the truth came to light. Secrets have a way of unraveling at the worst possible moment. What begins quietly, hidden in the corners of stolen time, can grow into something that demands to be seen, no matter how carefully it's concealed. And for Thomas and Taylor, the moment they feared, the moment they never thought would arrive, was finally here. Taylor had known something was wrong for a few weeks. At first, she ignored it, convincing herself that stress or exhaustion was to blame. But as the days passed, the signs became impossible to dismiss. The nausea in the mornings, the sudden fatigue, the growing feeling that something had changed within her. Eventually, she bought a pregnancy test, hoping, praying that it was just her imagination. But when the two lines appeared, confirming her worst fear, the ground beneath her seemed to shift. She stared at the test in disbelief, her heart racing as 1,000 thoughts flooded her mind. She wasn't prepared for this. She hadn't planned for this. And yet there it was, the undeniable proof that life, in all its chaotic unpredictability, had taken a turn she never saw coming. She sat in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of the realization settling heavily on her chest. And in that silence, only one thought stood out clearly. She had to tell Thomas. He had promised to be there for her, to help her build a future. If anyone could help her navigate this, it would be him, wouldn't he? When Taylor finally gathered the courage to tell him, it was during one of their late-night meetings. They were sitting together, the air between them thick with the usual mix of tension and intimacy. She knew that once she said the words, everything would change. There would be no going back. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I need to tell you something." He glanced at her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" he asked, as if leaning in slightly, as if bracing himself for what was coming. Taylor hesitated for a moment, her hands trembling slightly, and then she said it. The words tumbled out before she could second-guess herself. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Thomas stared at her, his expression frozen in disbelief. The words hung in the air like a ticking bomb, each second stretching into an eternity. Panic hit him like a tidal wave. His mind raced through the implications, what this meant for his career, his family, his reputation. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was now hanging by a thread. If anyone found out, if his wife, his daughters, the town, or the department discovered the truth, his life would be over. Thomas felt the walls closing in around him, the weight of his double life crushing him from all sides. He needed a solution, something quick, something final. This couldn't get out. It would not get out.
The plan formed slowly, taking shape in the dark corners of his mind. If Taylor was gone, if she simply disappeared, no one would ever know. There would be questions, of course, but questions could be managed. He was the sheriff, after all. He had experience in controlling investigations, in steering them away from inconvenient truths. He could make it look like she had vanished on her own. He could make sure that no one ever connected the dots. Thomas waited until the time was right. He reached out to Taylor, his voice calm and reassuring, as he invited her to dinner at a secluded location, just the two of them. He framed it as a way to talk about the future, to make plans for the baby, to figure out how they could navigate the situation together. And Taylor, despite everything, still believed in him. She wanted to believe that they could make things work, that Thomas would stand by her like he had promised. She arrived at the location, a small cabin on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes. Thomas greeted her with the same familiar smile, the same comforting presence that had drawn her in from the beginning. He had prepared everything meticulously, a quiet dinner, just the two of them, with wine poured into delicate glasses and a warm fire crackling in the hearth.
They talked over dinner, her conversation laced with promises and reassurances. Thomas told her everything she wanted to hear, that they would figure it out, that they could still build a future together, that everything would be okay. And for a brief moment, Taylor allowed herself to believe him. She let her guard down, feeling the familiar pull of the man she thought she knew. But Thomas's mind was elsewhere, focused on the small vial hidden in his pocket, a vial containing the drug that would ensure Taylor never told a soul. He waited for the right moment. Taylor was focused on the conversation, unaware of Thomas's growing tension as she picked at her dinner. Thomas leaned in, casually reaching for her glass. "Let me top that off for you," he offered, with an easy smile, lifting the wine bottle. Before she could respond, while he was pouring, he palmed the vial. With practiced ease, he tilted the bottle slightly, allowing the vial's contents to slip into the wine, undetected. No stirring, no swirling. It dissolved seamlessly, the powder hidden within the rich red. He handed the glass back without missing a beat, his voice smooth and conversational. "This should help us relax a little." He watched as Taylor, trusting and oblivious, took a sip, then another. The wine flowed easily as the conversation continued. It didn't take long for the drug to take effect. Taylor's eyelids grew heavy, her words slurred as she tried to keep up. A wave of confusion washed over her, and she looked at Thomas with a frown, as if trying to make sense of the sudden exhaustion that had overtaken her. "I don't feel so good," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas reached out, his hand resting on hers in a gesture of false comfort. "It's okay," he said softly. "You just need to rest. Everything's going to be fine." Taylor's body grew limp, her head lolling to the side as the drug pulled her into unconsciousness. Thomas watched her for a moment, ensuring the drug had done its job. And then, without a trace of hesitation, he moved to the next phase of his plan. He carried her to his truck, her unconscious form cradled in his arms, like a dark echo of the day he had held her as a newborn. But this time, there was no joy, no pride, only cold determination. Thomas drove in silence, the road stretching out before him like a path towards freedom. He had chosen the location carefully, a remote area deep in the woods, far from any trail or road. It was a place no one would stumble upon by accident, a place where secrets could stay buried. The drive was long, the weight of what he was about to do pressing down on him with every mile. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The moment he had crossed the line, there was no turning back. There was only one way forward now, and he was committed to seeing it through. When he reached the clearing, he stepped out of the truck and looked around, ensuring they were alone. The forest was silent, the trees standing like silent witnesses to what was about to happen. Thomas opened the door and lifted Taylor from the passenger seat, her body still limp and unresponsive. He carried her deep into the woods, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath his boots. And then, in that remote, forgotten place, he did what he had convinced himself he had to do. He knelt beside her, his hands trembling only slightly as he placed them over her mouth and nose. Taylor stirred briefly, her body reacting instinctively, but the drug had taken too strong a hold. Within moments, the struggle stopped, and the forest fell silent once more. Thomas sat there for a moment, his hands still pressed against her lifeless face, his breath coming in ragged gasps. And then, as if on autopilot, he began to dig. He worked quickly, the dirt flying beneath his hands as he created a shallow grave. Time blurred, the weight of his actions settling like a stone in his chest. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop, not now.
When he had crossed the line, there was no turning back. There was only one way forward now, and he was committed to seeing it through.
Thomas stood over the grave, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The night was still, the forest holding its breath, as if waiting to see what he would do next. But there was nothing left to do. He had made his choice, and now there was only silence. Without a word, Thomas turned and made his way back to the truck, leaving no trace of what had transpired. The forest would keep his secret, and with it, the life he had been so desperate to protect. But some secrets refuse to stay buried. When someone goes missing in a close-knit town, it sends shockwaves through every corner of the community. People rally together, neighbors exchange worried glances, families cling tighter to each other, hoping it never happens to them. But this time, the missing person wasn't just anyone. This was Taylor Mitchell, the daughter of a beloved officer, a girl everyone knew and adored. The day Taylor didn't come home, panic began to spread. Her parents, Marcus and his wife, went from thinking she was running late to realizing something was very, very wrong. They tried her phone, no answer. They called her friends, none of them had seen her. And when the hours ticked by with no sign of Taylor, the fear set in, like a cold wave crashing over them. Marcus knew something was off. His gut twisted with a father's instinct, that nagging feeling he couldn't shake. Taylor wasn't the type to vanish without a word, without letting someone know where she was. And as the sun set on that first day without her, Marcus did the only thing he could. He called in a missing persons report. The sheriff's office sprang into action, or so it looked. Leading the search was none other than Thomas Brennan, the man who had every reason to make sure Taylor was never found. Thomas wore the mask of professionalism perfectly, his voice steady, his demeanor calm, as he promised the community that he would do everything in his power to bring Taylor home. But every step Thomas took was calculated. Every lead followed, every search organized, was done with one goal in mind: to keep the truth buried along with Taylor. The search started immediately, with deputies canvassing the town, questioning anyone who might have seen her. Thomas ensured that every effort looked genuine. Teams scoured parks, abandoned buildings, back roads. He was there every step of the way, barking orders, comforting volunteers, appearing to go above and beyond. To everyone else, he looked like a man determined to find the missing girl. But in reality, Thomas was always 2 steps ahead, steering the investigation away from the one place they'd never look, the remote spot where Taylor's body lay hidden beneath the cold earth. Marcus, desperate for answers, leaned heavily on Thomas, his longtime friend and mentor. Thomas played the part well, offering words of comfort and support, his arms slung around Marcus's shoulders as they combed through the possibilities. "We'll find her, Marcus," he said more than once, his voice steady and reassuring. "I promise you, we'll bring her home." Each time Marcus's hope wavered, Thomas was there to catch him. He stayed close to the family, visiting their home often, sitting at their kitchen table, holding Taylor's mother's hand while she wept. He became their lifeline in the chaos, the one person they felt they could rely on when everything else was falling apart. And that's exactly how Thomas wanted it. But Thomas's grip on the investigation was tight. He carefully controlled the narrative, guiding deputies and volunteers towards false leads. He suggested that Taylor might have left town on her own, perhaps overwhelmed by the pressures of school and life. He floated the idea that she might be staying with a friend who hadn't come forward, or even that she might be picked up by someone she knew. His theories planted seeds of doubt, redirecting the search towards meaningless trails that led to nowhere. Thomas knew how to manipulate the emotions of those around him,
playing the role of the concerned sheriff while subtly pushing the investigation further from the truth. Every time the search teams got close to an area he feared they might uncover, Thomas conveniently found a new lead, a sighting that needed to be checked out on the other side of town, a tip that required immediate attention elsewhere. He kept everyone moving, always one step behind where they needed to be, ensuring that no one ever came close to the grave where Taylor's body rested beneath the cold earth. Marcus, desperate for answers, clung to every word Thomas said, believing that he was doing everything in his power to find their daughter. Marcus especially relied on Thomas more than anyone else. As a father and an officer, Marcus felt helpless in the face of his daughter's disappearance. But with Thomas leading the charge, he felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that if anyone could bring Taylor back, it was the man he had trusted for so many years. Thomas knew exactly how to manipulate that trust, using it to keep Marcus close while keeping the truth at bay. He made sure to include Marcus in every step of the investigation, giving him just enough responsibility to feel involved, but never enough to uncover the truth. And when Marcus's frustration boiled over, Thomas was there to absorb it, to let him vent his anger, without raising suspicion. "It should have been me," Marcus said more than once, guilt and grief thick in his voice. "I should have protected her." Thomas would shake his head, his expression solemn. "This isn't your fault, Marcus. We'll find her. I promise you, we'll bring her home." It was the perfect manipulation, a delicate balance of comfort and deceit.
Thomas gave the Mitchells just enough hope to keep them going, just enough reassurance to prevent them from looking too closely at the gaps in the investigation. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no sign of Taylor. The community grew restless, rumors spreading like wildfire. Theories whispered in hushed tones. She ran away. She met someone online. She was taken. But through it all, Thomas remained a steady presence, the man everyone looked to for answers. Behind the scenes, however, the weight of his actions was beginning to take its toll. Each day the investigation dragged on was a reminder of the terrible truth he was hiding. And though he wore the mask of the concerned sheriff well, there were moments when the cracks began to show. Moments when the guilt gnawed at the edges of his mind, threatening to unravel the carefully constructed lie he had built. But Thomas couldn't afford to falter. The moment he slipped, the moment he let his guard down, everything would come crashing down around him. So he kept moving, kept directing the search, kept feeding Marcus and his wife just enough hope to keep them from giving up. He knew that time was on his side. The longer the search went on without results, the more people would begin to believe that Taylor was gone for good. The investigation dragged on long enough. Eventually, it would fade into the background, just another unsolved case, another tragedy with no answers. That was the hope Thomas clung to, that the search would fizzle out, that the town would move on, and that his secret would remain buried where no one would ever find it. But secrets have a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deeply they're buried. And as the days passed, the pressure on Thomas grew heavy. The cracks in his carefully controlled world spread wider with each passing moment. The investigation he had worked so hard to control was slipping further from his grasp. And the harder he tried to keep it contained, the more fragile it became. But for now, Thomas remained in control, there. He kept the investigation alive, just enough to maintain appearances. Kept Marcus close, enough to keep him from looking elsewhere. And kept the truth buried beneath layers of lies and false leads. But Thomas knew, deep down, that this fragile charade couldn't last forever. The truth was out there, waiting to be crushed. And it finally came to light, to tear through everything in its path. Time has a way of dulling memories and softening
one of those unsolved tragedies that leave behind more questions than answers. The search parties had slowed. The posters plastered on storefronts had started to peel. The once constant buzz of speculation had quieted to murmurs. It seemed, at least to some, that Taylor had simply vanished without a trace. And Thomas Brennan believed that with time, the truth would remain buried, just like Taylor. But then, as it often does in stories like these, the truth began to surface, unexpectedly and from the most unlikely place. The truth doesn't stay buried forever, no matter how deeply someone tries to hide it. It wasn't hackers or investigators who uncovered the first cracks in Thomas Brennan's web of lies. It was two ordinary hikers out for what should have been a peaceful day on the trails. They had no idea that what lay ahead would unravel a mystery that had haunted the town for months. The hikers, a couple in their late 20s, had ventured deep into a forested area rarely visited by anyone other than wildlife enthusiasts. The trail was rough and winding, twisting through dense woods where silence reigned, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. It was the kind of place where no one would expect to find anything but nature, much less a hidden secret. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows along the trail, they noticed something strange, an unnatural disturbance in the ground just off the path. A patch of earth, uneven and slightly sunken, stood out from the rest of the forest floor. The hikers exchanged uneasy glances. It could have been nothing, a buried animal, maybe, but something about it felt off. Their curiosity got the better of them. With hesitant steps, they approached the disturbed ground. As one of them knelt down to inspect it more closely, they noticed something chilling. What looked like a corner of fabric, barely visible beneath the dirt and fallen leaves. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send a shiver down their spines. They knew better to disturb the sight any further. Instead, they marked the location with their GPS and quickly made their way back to the nearest ranger station, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The rangers, alerted by the hikers' discovery, contacted local authorities, and within hours, a full investigative team was on site. What they found beneath the disturbed ground confirmed the hikers' worst fears. Taylor Mitchell's body, wrapped carefully in a tarp, lay in a shallow grave. Her remains told a silent, heartbreaking story of betrayal and violence. But the discovery didn't just reveal the location of her body. It raised more questions than it answered. How had Taylor ended up here? And more importantly, who put her there? As the forensic team worked methodically at the scene, law enforcement officers scoured the surrounding area for clues.
And it was there, among the dirt and foliage, that they found the first piece of undeniable evidence. A small vial, half buried in the earth, bearing the faint imprint of a fingerprint. It was a clue, seemingly insignificant at first glance, but one that would later prove vital to the investigation. With Taylor's body recovered, the case that had grown cold suddenly reignited. The detectives took over the investigation, determined to piece together the truth behind her disappearance. They combed through GPS data from Taylor's phone, tracing her movements from the night she vanished. And what they found began to unravel the carefully crafted lies Thomas had spun. The data showed a troubling pattern. Taylor's phone had pinged from several locations, far from where Thomas claimed she had last been seen. Among them, a remote gas station just outside of town. A seemingly unremarkable stop that would become a critical piece of evidence in the case. When the detectives obtained surveillance footage from the gas station, the full scope of Thomas's deception came into focus. The grainy video, recorded on the same night Taylor vanished, showed Thomas's truck pulling into the parking lot.
His expression was tight, his eyes scanning the area as if checking for any unwanted attention. And in the passenger seat, slumped and unmoving, was Taylor. Her head rested against the window, her body limp. Thomas stepped out of the vehicle and glanced around the lot. He went inside briefly, emerging moments later, and cast another glance toward Taylor's lifeless form before getting back into the driver's seat. With a quick look over his shoulder, Thomas drove off into the night, the truck disappearing from the frame, and, until now, from the town's collective memory. The video was damning, not just because it placed Thomas with Taylor on the night she vanished, but because of the state she was in, unconscious, vulnerable, and in the company of the very man sworn to protect her. The footage raised immediate questions. Why had Thomas never mentioned being with Taylor that night? Why had he failed to report their encounter in his official statements? And what had really happened after they left the gas station? With Taylor's movements traced to the burial site and surveillance footage tying Thomas to her final hours, the detectives knew they were closing in on the truth. But they needed more than suspicion. They needed hard evidence. And the key to unlocking that evidence lay in the digital breadcrumbs Taylor's phone had left behind. The GPS data from Thomas's truck, pulled from onboard tracking systems, provided the final piece of the puzzle. The logs confirmed what the surveillance footage had suggested. Thomas's truck had traveled from the gas station to the remote area where Taylor's body was found, matching the exact location marked by the hikers. Every turn, every stop was accounted for, painting a chilling picture of premeditation and cover-up. It was a trail Thomas hadn't expected anyone to follow. But no matter how carefully he had tried to conceal his actions, the truth had found a way to the surface. First, through the hikers on the trail, then through the relentless work of investigators determined to uncover the lies hidden beneath the surface. The discovery of Taylor's body wasn't just the end of a search, it was the beginning of justice. And the hikers, unaware of the storm their quiet walk in the woods would unleash, had unknowingly uncovered the secret Thomas Brennan had buried, both literally and figuratively. As the investigation gained momentum, the truth about Thomas's betrayal spread through the town like wildfire. His carefully crafted facade of authority crumbled beneath the weight of the evidence. And with each new discovery, the community began to understand the depth of his deception and the price Taylor had paid for his abuse of power. The hiker's discovery on that remote trail would become the turning point in a case that had gone cold for too long. And as the town braced for the storm that was about to follow, one thing was certain: no secret, no matter how deeply buried, could stay hidden forever. The click of the handcuffs echoed through the quiet office as they locked around his wrists, cold metal biting into his skin. Thomas said nothing, the fight drained from him as the weight of his actions settled like a stone in his chest. There was no more running, no more lying. The truth had caught up with him, and there was nowhere left to hide. The agents guided him out of the office, past the deputies who had once respected him, past the desks where he had commanded authority. Now they looked at him not as their sheriff, but as the man who betrayed everything the badge stood for. Whispers followed him down the hall, the weight of their judgment heavy on his shoulders. As the agents escorted Thomas to the waiting car, the sun rose high in the sky, casting harsh light on the day of reckoning. The truth, once buried beneath lies and manipulation, had finally come to the surface. And with it, Thomas Brennan's life as he knew it was over. The man who had spent his life serving justice was now bound by the same system he had once controlled, a prisoner of his own sins. And as the car doors slammed shut, the message was clear: no one, not even the sheriff, is above the law.
Grief by itself is unbearable, but discovering the full extent of a tragedy brings a pain few can describe.
When the detectives recovered Taylor Mitchell's body, the nightmare deepened with every revelation that followed. It wasn't just the betrayal of trust, the horrific murder, the loss of a young life. The autopsy revealed a final, devastating truth that shattered what little remained of her family's world. The forensic team confirmed that Taylor had been in the early stages of pregnancy. The child she had carried, Thomas Brennan's child, had been growing inside her when her life was violently taken. That discovery turned the grief of her parents, Marcus and his wife, into something unbearable. They weren't just mourning their daughter, they were mourning the grandchild they would never meet. It was a loss layered with betrayal, violation, and unspoken dreams. Marcus could barely process the news. His hands shook when the detectives informed him of the pregnancy. It was more than he could bear. The knowledge that his own daughter had carried a child, only to be silenced by a man he trusted, a man who had sat at his kitchen table and offered him comfort as they searched for her. The weight of that betrayal pressed down on Marcus's chest, suffocating him with a guilt he couldn't shake. How had he missed the signs? How could he have stood beside Thomas, searching for his daughter, while the man responsible led them astray? And the pregnancy, he hadn't even known she was in a relationship, let alone involved with a man like Thomas. It was too much. The betrayal came at him in layers, peeling back everything he thought he knew, leaving him raw and exposed. Taylor's mother, already buried under the weight of her grief, fell into complete despair when the autopsy results were revealed. The child would have been her first grandchild, a new beginning, a reason to hope. And now, both Taylor and the unborn child were gone, buried together under a blanket of lies and deception. There were no words that could ease the pain of such a loss. Every dream she had for her daughter's future was gone, wiped away in the cruelest way. The news of Taylor's pregnancy spread quickly, turning an already horrific crime into something even more unthinkable. Thomas Brennan wasn't just a murderer, he was a predator who had exploited his position of power, manipulated a young girl, and taken 2 lives to cover his tracks. The man who had once been the community's protector now stood as a symbol of everything they despised. Protesters gathered outside the sheriff's office and the courthouse, their voices echoing through the streets. Signs demanding justice for Taylor and baby waved in the air, and the calls for Thomas's conviction grew louder by the day. The community, once proud of its sheriff, now viewed him as a monster in uniform. Every kind gesture, every award he had received felt like a mockery of the evil he had hidden beneath his badge. In the Brennan household, the revelations were equally devastating. Rebecca Brennan sat in stunned silence as the news unfolded, her world collapsing under the weight of her husband's lies. She had been blindsided by the affair, shattered by the murder, but the pregnancy, that was the final blow, the one truth she couldn't comprehend. She thought back to every moment she had shared with Thomas, every day he had spent with their daughters, knowing now that he had carried this unspeakable secret the entire time. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the knowledge that her husband had fathered a child with Taylor, a girl they had watched grow up, a friend to their own daughter. The sheer cruelty of it left her speechless. Sophie Brennan, Thomas's youngest daughter and Taylor's best friend, was broken by the news. She had spent weeks mourning Taylor, trying to understand how her father could be involved in such a crime. But learning about the pregnancy was too much to bear. Taylor had been carrying her half-sibling, and now both were gone, taken by the man she once called Dad.
It was a betrayal so profound that Sophie didn't know how to process it. She retreated into herself, shutting out the world. She refused to speak to her father, wouldn't even acknowledge his existence. The idea of him disgusted her. Every memory they had shared, the moments she once cherished, were now tainted by the knowledge of what he had done. She felt as though her entire life had been built on lies, and the weight of that realization crushed her. Sophie's older sister responded with anger. She had always been closer to her father, had looked up to him as a role model, only to discover that he had committed unspeakable acts against someone she had grown up with. The pregnancy was the final straw. She packed her things and left the house, cutting all ties with her father, unable to forgive him for the lives he had destroyed. The Brennan house, once filled with laughter and routine, became a silent war zone. Rebecca tried to hold her daughters together, but there was no repairing the damage Thomas had done. Their family was broken, beyond repair, fractured by the weight of his betrayal. And in the quiet moments, when the world felt still, Rebecca sat alone, grappling with the reality that the man she had loved for decades was capable of such monstrous acts. The community's anger burned hotter with every passing day. Taylor had been one of their own, bright, ambitious, and full of potential. And now, both she and her unborn child were gone, victims of a man they once trusted. The demand for justice was relentless. They wanted to see Thomas punished, not just for Taylor's death, but for the life of the child she carried. They wanted to ensure that he could never hurt anyone again. Marcus and his wife found some solace in the community's support, but it was a cold comfort. The loss of their daughter and grandchild left a void that could never be filled. They attended every court hearing, sitting in the front row, determined to see Thomas face the full weight of justice. But even a conviction wouldn't bring Taylor back. Even seeing Thomas in handcuffs wouldn't heal the wounds left behind.
The tragedy that began with Thomas's manipulation had grown into something far larger, a story of betrayal, loss, broken trust. The community would never forget what had happened, and neither would the families involved. The name Thomas Brennan would forever be associated with pain, with loss, with the lives he had destroyed to protect his own secrets. And as the trial loomed, the town prepared itself for the final chapter, a reckoning long overdue. For Taylor, for her child, and for everyone whose lives had been shattered by the man they once called sheriff. The trial of Thomas Brennan gripped the community and the nation, drawing everyone into the dark story of betrayal, manipulation, and murder. Reporters packed the courtroom, cameras perched outside like vultures, ready to capture every moment of the sheriff's downfall. It was not just a trial, it was a reckoning, one that demanded every ugly truth be laid bare for the world to see. From the outset, the prosecution wasted no time laying out their case, presenting a narrative of manipulation that revealed Thomas's true nature. A man who had exploited his authority and preyed on someone who trusted him. Every move he made was calculated, they argued, from the start of the affair to the cold-blooded murder that followed. Thomas Brennan, they said, was not the man the community had thought he was. He was a man who used his badge as a shield to hide his darkest impulses. Piece by piece, the prosecutors reconstructed the events leading up to Taylor's death, using surveillance footage, phone records, and forensic evidence to paint a damning picture. They exposed Thomas's efforts to manipulate Taylor, convincing her to meet with him under the pretext of mentorship. They explained how he lured her to the remote location, drugged her, and ultimately killed her to protect his reputation and career. The courtroom was silent as the prosecutors described Thomas's actions. Every word felt like a hammer striking the very foundations of trust.
Each piece of evidence served as a reminder of the man Thomas had pretended to be and the monster he had become beneath the surface. Then came the emotional testimonies, and with them, the heart of the trial was laid bare. Taylor's parents were the first to take the stand. There was no disguising the grief etched into their faces, nor the weight of the pain they carried. As they spoke about the daughter they had lost, Marcus's voice cracked. He recalled the first day Thomas had joined their search for Taylor, standing beside him as a trusted friend. "He looked me in the eye," Marcus said, struggling to hold back tears. "He told me we'd find her. And the whole time, he knew exactly where she was." His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands, the weight of the betrayal too much to bear. Taylor's mother's testimony was equally devastating. She spoke about the dreams Taylor had for her future, the plans she had shared late at night over cups of tea. "She wanted to make a difference," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She wanted to work for the FBI, to protect people. And instead, the man we trusted, our friend, stole her future and buried it in the ground." Her words hung in the air, suffused with the sorrow of a mother who would never see her daughter grow into the woman she was meant to become. As the trial continued, the courtroom was filled with a palpable tension. Every testimony, every exhibit presented brought the harsh truth into sharper focus. But the most shocking testimony came from Thomas's own family. Rebecca Brennan, his wife, took the stand with a heavy heart. Her voice was steady, but filled with disbelief. "I don't know who my husband is anymore," she admitted. "The man I married, the father of my children, wasn't capable of this. Or at least, I thought he wasn't." She spoke about the months of lies, the late nights when Thomas returned home with excuses that now felt like insults. "I believed him," she said quietly. "I believed every word. And now I have to live with the fact that I was married to a man I never really knew." Her words landed with the weight of 1,000 betrayals, a wife forced to confront the darkest truth about the man she had shared her life with. Sophie Brennan, Thomas's youngest daughter, gave perhaps the most painful testimony of the trial. As she sat in the witness chair, tears streaming down her face, she spoke about the friendship she had shared with Taylor and the devastation she felt when the truth came to light. "She was my best friend," she said, trembling. "She was like a sister to me, and my father took her away from me." The room fell into silence as Sophie's grief poured out, unfiltered and raw. The prosecution pressed further, painting a picture of a man who had not only betrayed his badge, but destroyed 2 families in the process. They described the lengths Thomas went to in order to maintain control, his manipulation of Taylor, the lies he told his family, the web of deceit he spun around everyone who trusted him. Finally, it was Thomas's turn to face questioning. The room was still as he took the stand, the weight of his actions pressing down on him from all sides. He had denied the affair at first, denied everything, clinging to the hope that he could somehow escape the consequences. But as the evidence stacked up, it became clear that there was no escape. Under the relentless questioning of the prosecutor, his defenses began to crumble. His mask of calm authority slipped away, revealing the man beneath, a man consumed by fear, regret, and guilt.
"Did you have an affair with Taylor?" the prosecutor asked, his voice steady and unyielding. Thomas hesitated, the weight of the truth suffocating him. He opened his mouth to deny it again, but the words wouldn't come. His shoulders sagged under the crushing burden, and for the first time, he told the truth. "Yes," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I did." The confession sent a ripple through the courtroom. Thomas's family sat frozen in disbelief while Taylor's parents clutched each other, their grief too overwhelming to contain. But the prosecutor wasn't finished. He pressed further, forcing Thomas to confront the full extent of his actions. "And did you kill her?" the prosecutor asked, leaning in closer. "Did you take her life to protect your secret?" Thomas's composure shattered. His hands trembled as he buried them in them, the weight of his guilt too heavy to bear. "Yes," he choked out. "I killed her. I didn't know what else to do." His sobs filled the courtroom, the sound of a man broken by his own sins. The room sat in stunned silence. The confession hung in the air like a heavy cloud. There were no more lies to tell, no more masks to wear. Thomas Brennan, once the respected sheriff, had admitted to the unthinkable. The trial was far from over, but the truth had finally come to light. Thomas's confession marked the beginning of the end, an end that would bring justice for Taylor and her unborn child, and some semblance of closure to the families whose lives had been shattered. And as the gavel struck, signaling the end of the day's proceedings, one thing was certain. Thomas Brennan's fate was sealed, and there would be no escaping the consequences of his actions. The courtroom was silent, heavy with the weight of justice about to be delivered. Thomas Brennan stood shackled before the judge, his shoulders slumped under the crushing weight of what he had done. But no chains, no bars could ever truly reflect the gravity of the lives lost at his hands. The life of Taylor Mitchell, the young woman he betrayed, and the unborn child she carried. This was not just the sentencing of a man, it was the reckoning for 2 lives stolen too soon. The judge cleared his throat, his face solemn as he addressed the courtroom. His words carried the weight of the community's sorrow, the devastation of 2 grieving families, and the shame of betrayal from a man once entrusted with power and responsibility. "There would be no easy way to deliver this sentence," he began, his voice calm but firm, for no words could fully capture the harm inflicted by Thomas Brennan. "Mr. Brennan, you have not only committed a grievous crime, but you have also left behind irreparable damage to the lives of those you were sworn to protect. You betrayed a young woman who trusted you, exploited her vulnerability under the guise of mentorship, and in doing so, took your authority in the most despicable way imaginable." The courtroom remained still as the judge's gaze hardened. "Taylor Mitchell was not only a victim of your manipulation, she was a young woman with dreams, ambitions, and a future ahead of her. A future that included the unborn child she carried, a child you helped create, and a child you silenced when you decided to take Taylor's life." Gasps rippled through the gallery, the weight of the revelation setting in once again. Taylor had carried within her not just the hopes of her parents, but the beginnings of a new life, a life that would never see the light of day, all because of Thomas's desperate need to cover his tracks. The judge paused, allowing the gravity of those words to sink in before continuing. "The unborn child growing in Taylor was your child, Mr. Brennan. You knew the consequences of that revelation would ruin your career, your reputation, and your family. And in a moment of selfishness and cowardice, you chose to end 2 lives to protect yourself. That choice reflects the depths of your betrayal, not just to Taylor, but to your own unborn child." Marcus and his wife clung to each other, their grief too overwhelming for words. The child Taylor had carried, an innocent life caught in the crossfire of manipulation and betrayal, would never be known, never have a name. And the knowledge of that loss, like a wound that would never heal, would remain with them for the rest of their lives. On the other side of the courtroom, Rebecca lowered her head, unable to reconcile the man she had married with the monster now led away in chains. Her daughters sat frozen in their seats, their emotions swirling in a storm of confusion and sorrow. The trial had revealed too much, truths they never wanted to know, burdens they never thought they would carry. As Thomas was escorted from the courtroom, the community watched in silence. They had placed their trust in him, and he had shattered it in the worst way possible. The sentence was justice, but it could never truly heal the scar left behind. Taylor and her child were gone, and no amount of justice could bring them back. The judge's final words lingered in the air as the courtroom emptied. Let this serve as a reminder that power is not a privilege, it is a responsibility. And when that responsibility is betrayed, there are consequences. No one is above the law, and no betrayal will go unanswered. The trial of Thomas Brennan would be remembered not just as the story of one man's fall from grace, but as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of accountability. It was a reminder that authority means nothing without integrity, and that every betrayal, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually come to light. And so, with Thomas's sentence to life without parole, the community was left to pick up the pieces. Justice had been served, but the loss remained, a haunting reminder of the lives stolen too soon and the trust that could never be restored. Even after the trial ended and Thomas Brennan was locked away, the pain he caused lingered like a shadow over the community. There were no easy answers, no quick resolutions. Taylor's death was not just a tragedy, it was a reckoning that forced everyone to confront the reality of betrayal hidden behind power and trust. And in the wake of such devastation, healing was slow and uneven, but it had to begin somewhere. For Marcus and his wife, the loss of their daughter was a wound that would never fully heal. There were days when the grief felt unbearable, when the silence left behind by Taylor's absence was too loud to ignore. But they refused to let her memory be defined solely by tragedy. Determined to create something meaningful from their pain, they founded the Taylor Mitchell Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping young women who had suffered abuse at the hands of those in power. The foundation became a beacon of hope, providing legal aid, counseling, and mentorship for survivors of abuse. What started as a local initiative quickly grew, attracting national attention. The Mitchell family traveled the country, speaking at schools and community centers, determined to prevent other families from experiencing the same nightmare they had endured. For Marcus and his wife, the foundation was a way to honor their daughter's memory and protect others from the dangers she faced. But healing took many forms, and not all of it was visible to the public. Rebecca Brennan and her daughters quietly packed their lives into boxes and left town, hoping to escape the scandal that had consumed their family. The weight of Thomas's betrayal was too great to bear in the community they once called home. Every street, every face was a reminder of what had been lost. Rebecca chose a new town, far away from the headlines, a place where she and her daughters could start over. For Sophie and her sister, moving away offered a chance at healing, but it also meant confronting the reality of who their father was. It would be years before they could fully process what had happened, before they could separate their memories of the man they loved from the monster he became. Their journey toward healing would be long and complicated, but it was a step they were ready to take, together. Back in town, the community struggled to rebuild. Trust, once freely given, became harder to come by. The sheriff's office underwent a complete overhaul, with new leadership determined to restore the public's faith. Policies were rewritten, safeguards put in place, and mandatory training on ethics and accountability became standard practice. The town knew it would take more than just new policies to rebuild trust, but they were willing to try.
Local schools and community groups partnered with the Mitchell Foundation to create programs aimed at educating young people about the dangers of manipulation and abuse of power. It became a part of the town's identity, a lesson learned the hard way, but one they were determined not to forget. Taylor's story was shared openly, not as a scar, but as a reminder of the importance of speaking up, of holding those in power accountable. There were still moments of anger, of frustration. The wound Thomas left behind would take years to heal, and some would never fully recover. But slowly, bit by bit, the community found ways to move forward. They knew that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about remembering and learning, about becoming stronger and wiser through the pain. Even as the town began to rebuild, a question lingered, one that haunted every family, every officer, every person who had followed the case. How do we protect ourselves from those sworn to protect us? Thomas Brennan had worn a badge, had sworn an oath to serve and protect, and yet he had used that badge to manipulate, to betray, to destroy. His story was not just one of personal failure, it was a warning, a reminder that power in the wrong hands is a dangerous thing. The question now was not just about justice for Taylor, it was about preventing the next betrayal before it could happen. But this story is not the only one of its kind. There are others, other abuses of power, other betrayals hidden behind authority, waiting to be uncovered. Stories of manipulation, exploitation, and control. Stories that demand to be told. Stories that remind us why accountability matters and why we must never stop questioning those who hold power. And so, we leave you with this question. What would you do if the person meant to protect you became the one you feared most? How do we guard against those who hide behind trust and authority? There are more stories to tell, more truths waiting to be revealed, stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. If you believe in uncovering the unseen, if you believe in justice, in truth, in giving voice to the silenced, then please hit subscribe and join us at Unseen Crime Stories. Because the only way to prevent betrayal is to shine a light on the dark corners where it hides. This isn't the end, it's only the beginning.